Hey everybody! Today I'm going to talk to you about my personal struggle as a female athlete and specifically my struggle with an eating disorder. So at the time I felt completely alone and like nobody on this planet knew what I was going through because nobody else on the planet was going through what I was going through. But I learned that there are tons of other female athletes out there that can relate and are struggling with this, and you might be one of them. And if you're not one of them, you probably know somebody that is. So I hope you'll share this episode with them. I'm also going to talk to you about my first steps to recovery and when things started to click for me. So without further ado, let's get into it. Do you wish you could look like you train as much as you do? Are you sick of scouring the internet for sports nutrition tips only to find information tailored to men? Do you wish there was a simple solution to fueling your body for your activity level? Are you ready to find freedom with food? It is possible to have balance between fueling your body for your sport and for enjoyment, and it's not as complicated as you may think. Can we say hello, food freedom? There's a way to have it all and eat your cake too, and I'm going to show you how. Hey, I'm Kristen, a former multi-sport athlete, a sports dietitian, personal trainer, and Jesus lover. In this podcast, you will find practical, sustainable fueling tips for female athletes that will set you free from diet culture, an ever-changing set of nutrition rules, under-fueling, and underperforming. You'll learn how to put together a fueling plan that works for you, that doesn't require all the rules, tracking every morsel of food you consume, letting food consume your every thought, with Jesus at the center of it all. If you're ready to find a sustainable nutrition plan that works for you with your active lifestyle and is tailored to your unique physiology, break free from diet culture, and finally feel comfortable in your own skin, this podcast is for you. Whip up that smoothie, lace up your shoes, and let's jump in. Welcome to my very first episode on the Female Sports Nutrition Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and have you listening to my show. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you all about my personal struggle with nutrition as a female athlete and how God flipped the switch and turned this hot mess express around. So this is actually going to be split up into two parts because my story is pretty long. And so this first part is called the eating disorder phase. So we're going to start from the beginning. I was a dancer from the time I was 3 up until I was about 12 years old. I really got sick of my Friday nights being filled up with dance and not being able to hang out with my friends and go to parties and things like that. So I wound up quitting dance at around 12 years old. And in middle and high school, I became a multi-sport athlete. So I played everything from basketball to soccer to swimming. I even got into gymnastics, but settled on trampoline, which I loved. And I used to join my dad on bike rides on the weekends. He was an avid cyclist, and I was out there with my little one-speed bike. Eventually, I got a gear bike in there, and I was able to keep up. I ultimately settled on swimming as my main sport. And when I was swimming in the water, I felt like I could clear my mind and kind of meditate, if you will, because there wasn't any sound except for the swishing of water in my ears. But I had this like serotonin release while I was in there. It made me feel good being active and swimming, and I was able to just kind of filter through all of my thoughts through the day, and it was great for me. My mom always used to say that she thought there was something wrong with me. She would talk to all my teachers about it, saying, well, Kristen can never sit still. She always has so much energy. She's bouncing off the walls. She has to touch everything. And I honestly probably have had ADD or ADHD my entire life, but back then they really didn't have that as a diagnosis, or it was very, not much was known about it. They didn't diagnose it very much, and so I have just, I guess, learned to cope with things. And so my mom would actually just make me run around the backyard based off of my energy levels, which is a great thing to do. So with swimming 2 hours a day, 5 days a week with meets on the weekend, I was hungry all the time. I was eating everything and anything, and I used to have the nickname Bottomless Pit because I basically was a bottomless pit. At the same time, my mom was always on a diet. She tried everything from Weight Watchers. I used to go with her to Weight Watcher meetings. She did Jenny Craig for a period of time in there. She did the cabbage soup diet. You name it, she probably did it, and she used to pick herself apart in front of me and my sisters, and I remember that very specifically. And then my older sister started getting into joining her in on the diets. And so this to me just became very normal. This was normal life, And I honestly thought that's just what you do. You kind of pick yourself apart, and you should always be watching what you eat, even though I didn't really know anything about nutrition. So after high school, I decided to go to culinary school. I went to Johnson & Wales University for culinary school. I really loved to cook, and I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do with my life, so I went to culinary school. I did that for my my junior year and my senior year of high school at our tech center. So I continued on with that with college. And I stopped swimming. I gained a bunch of weight because I was in these cooking classes where we would actually cook our meals for that day. So I was in a cooking lab for 7 hours. I was eating all this gourmet food that we were cooking, and I wound up gaining weight, as you could imagine. So I did not know anything about nutrition at this point. I didn't know the difference between a calorie, a gram of fat, or what it even meant. And I knew that I wanted to lose some weight, but because I didn't know anything about nutrition, I didn't know anything about how to lose weight either. So I remember going home at certain parts during the year and people making comments to my sister, who later told me, like, oh, Kristen's gaining some weight. And that made me feel really bad, especially because I didn't really know what to do about it. I remember getting salads at the food court, but my salads weren't anything that were going to help me with losing weight. So it really didn't help me at all. So I wound up actually taking diet pills. I wound up taking Xenadrin, which had ephedra in them, and they definitely worked, but they made me feel like I was going crazy. I remember, actually, I only took a half a dose, but I remember feeling like just completely out of control and my hands shaking, and I really hated how I felt on them, but I really liked how I looked because I lost the weight. And then I started reading that Xenadrin was killing people. It was making them have heart attacks. And I was like, okay, I don't want that. So I just threw it in the trash. So I was back to square one because I gained all the weight back again. So while I was there at Johnson & Wales in culinary school, I really was interested in nutrition. I had to take a nutrition course while I was there, and I loved that class. And there was a girl in the next cooking lab over from me one day. She decided to become a vegetarian. She had not done any of her research and didn't know what she was doing. She wound up stopped eating protein for about 2 weeks, and she passed out in the middle of the class. So an ambulance had to be called to get her, and everybody else was worried about her, and I was worried about her, but at the same time, it was a defining moment for me. I remember saying, this is so cool. Nutrition is a science, and it just amplified my interest in nutrition. So I remember calling my mom that night, and I said, I don't really think I want to continue with culinary school. I really want to focus on nutrition. And so she said to me, well, University of Maryland is where I'm from, by the way, has a program called dietetics. You could become a registered dietitian. I didn't know what that even meant. I just knew I would be studying nutrition, and I was like, sure, sign me up. So I wound up finishing out the year of culinary school, and then I went home that summer. So that summer, after my freshman year of culinary school, I started lifeguarding at a pool that was about 30 minutes away from my parents' house. And after work, I started hanging out with friends at the pool. So I wasn't going home to eat dinner, and I was just hanging out with those friends. I was skipping dinner, and I started losing weight. And I was like, well, this is awesome. You don't eat and you just lose weight. And so I kind of continued on with that, and I wound up losing 30 pounds in about 2 months. It was a crazy amount of weight in a short amount of time. And that's when things started to spiral out of control. I started to feel hungry a lot, but the thought of food and actually eating food made me nauseous at times. I didn't eat anything healthy. I remember getting a 2 cheeseburger meal from McDonald's, and I could barely finish 1 cheeseburger, but I was always thinking about food at the same time. So I think it was just, my mind kind of playing tricks on me, making me feel nauseous, even though I knew that I should eat and I was hungry, but I just didn't want to eat. So my family at that point started to take notice, and they would ask me if I was okay. And my sister and her friend started to make comments saying things like, "You look disgusting, you need to eat." And that actually just kind of added fuel to the fire. And I really started to continue to not eat so that I wouldn't gain weight, or so I would continue to lose weight. And after a little while of continuing on with this, I was thinking, okay, something is wrong here. I knew in my mind that this was not right. And I, for whatever reason, had checked out this book, the DSM-4 from the library, which is a book where doctors and mental health professionals use to diagnose people with certain mental illnesses. And I was looking through there and I came across anorexia, and I fit the bill for anorexia. And I was like, wow, I have a problem. But I didn't do anything about it at that point. So that next school year, so the fall, I went to the community college over by my parents' house to get some prerequisite classes out of the way before I went to University of Maryland. And one of the classes that I took there was a yoga class, which I loved. And part of our coursework was to keep a weekly journal. And the teacher would actually read our journal each week and she would comment back. And so that journal I found was really good for me. It helped me to get my feelings out. And I actually started letting the yoga teacher in on my little secret that I was struggling with eating and body dissatisfaction. And it was like she became my pen pal. She was the only person that knew, and she would comment back. I don't really remember at this point what she would comment back, but I do know that it felt to me like somebody cared about me and was listening. So I started working out again at this point because I started working at a gym at the front desk near my parents' house. And while I was there, people would comment both at the gym and at school. I remember a teacher making a comment saying, "Wow, you look so good." And that just added more fuel to the fire. It just kind of motivated me to keep going with what I was doing. So I remember feeling out of control, and I got really angry at things. I felt like I took up too much space in the world, and I just really wanted to be thin and skinny like a runway model, and which is totally not my body type, by the way. And so I just was striving for this ideal that was really not going to happen for me. And it honestly didn't even matter that people were making comments that I did look good. It was not enough for me. So I really couldn't regulate my emotions. I remember I was dating my boyfriend at the time, and we got into a fight, and I was angry with him, so I wound up restricting more. And at one point, I realized, Kristen, this is kind of stupid because I'm just hurting myself and I'm not actually hurting him, but I didn't change what I was doing. I just kept doing it anyway. So I remember one night I got a salad from a gas station called Sheetz, kind of like a Wawa, if you know what that is. And I ordered the salad, and I was watching them behind the counter make the salad, and I saw them pour a ton of salad dressing on the salad. And I could feel my blood boiling. I was getting so angry about the amount of dressing that they put on this salad, because to me, dressing was high fat. It wasn't okay. I shouldn't be eating much of it. And I took the salad home, and I probably took about 3 bites of it. I didn't even really eat it because I was so mad about the amount of salad dressing that was on it. And that was not the first time. Things like that happened a lot, and I didn't really like other people preparing my food because I wanted to control how much was in it. So also, if I ate something that wasn't approved, in my opinion, or if I ate too much that day, I would tell myself, oh, I'm having a fat day, and I would restrict even more the next day. I remember weighing myself multiple times per day, which is really pointless because everybody gains weight over the course of the day from, fluids and food. And if I gained weight, I really could not handle it. I would shut down and I'd go to sleep, and I'd be so mad I would restrict more the next day. And I also remember during this time I was taking an evening class. I would sit in that class and I would be so hungry, and I didn't want to eat anything for dinner. So after that class would end, I would go and get coffee for my dinner to silence my stomach growling and make me full. So I did that for an entire year. Then I transferred to University of Maryland, and at this point, I moved into an apartment by myself because the roommate that I was supposed to have decided to go to another college at the last minute. So I felt very lonely. I missed my family, I missed my friends, and I hated my apartment. It was white, it was sterile, and I felt like I was basically in a jail cell. So things really started to progress from there because I was so lonely. At that point, I started looking at fitness magazines. I remember particularly Oxygen magazine. I wanted to look like the cover model that was on those magazines. I don't know if you remember those magazines, but they looked very strong and fit and muscular and toned. And I knew I wanted to look like them, but I had no idea how to do that. So I started spending hours standing in front of the mirror, picking myself apart. And even though I was skinny, it wasn't enough. And I didn't like what I saw. And honestly, I could have done a lot better in organic chemistry if I had not spent so much time in front of the mirror, but that's what I did. So I, at this point, knew what the difference was between a calorie and a gram of fat and a gram of carbohydrates and all that. And I knew in my head from memorization every calorie, every gram of fat that was in every food. I remember being interviewed by a on-campus reporter about some nutrition piece that she was doing, and I told her that, and she was like, "Really?" And she started quizzing me, and I knew everything, and she was really impressed at that time. So it seemed like probably on the outside things were going well, but I was really kind of dying on the inside. My mental health was really starting to crumble at this point. So I wound up getting 2 cats, which really helped with my mental health and comforted me. And I also remember feeling at that point, maybe I should go to church. I grew up going to church and maybe that would help me. But I never went, probably because I was just scared and I didn't know anybody and I didn't really know what was going to happen. So I never went. There was a nutrition class that I was in at the time, and there was a girl that came in. She was giving a presentation that day about raising awareness about eating disorders. And as part of that presentation, she gave her personal testimony. And I remember feeling like I could 100% relate to her story. So after the presentation was over, I immediately ran down to her and I said, "I am struggling with the same thing. Everything that you said to me resonated with me." And so she invited me to her group, which was called SEEDS, and that stood for Students Educating About Eating Disorders. And it was more of a counseling group for those struggling with eating disorders, which I did not know at the time because I probably wouldn't have gone. But that was probably the first piece of God just kind of drawing me in, but I had no idea at that point. So I joined the group. As part of being in that group, we did weekly kind of counseling sessions, if you wanted to say that, but we also gave presentations around campus, and those presentations were raising awareness about eating disorders. But as part of that, you told your personal story of, your struggle with an eating disorder. So I did this, and it was actually really good for me. And I remember one time having to give a presentation with a microphone in a seminar class in front of about 1,000 students. And I thought, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I'm talking to these people, this many people, about my problems right now. But I did it. And here I am now broadcasting, everything to the world. But I feel like a lot of people can resonate. So, and people did. Actually, people came up to me after the presentation and said, "Wow, I'm struggling with the same thing." So it felt good for me to be able to help people in a small way just then. So when I was in that group, in those counseling sessions, I realized, wow, there's other people that are struggling with this, and I'm not just completely alone, because I remember feeling like I must be the only person on the face of this planet that is struggling with this. And there was actually a girl that was in that group. She had actually just graduated, and she was now a grad assistant in the group. But she had previously been in the group when she was an undergrad. And she told us her story, and she had actually had a heart attack from bulimia. And that really scared me at the time, There was plenty of times when I felt so out of control and so gross and angry for eating something that I felt like I shouldn't have, and I wanted to just get it out of my body. So I remember wanting to make myself throw up, and there was a couple of times that I kind of tried, but I didn't try super hard because I was just too scared to go down that road, and I felt like if I did, it was the point of no return. So I never did that. So moving along, I was extremely stressed out for my classes. I was taking a lot of science classes, a lot of chemistry classes, and I started to develop some severe stomach pain, and I thought I had a stomach ulcer at that point. So things were, again, progressing with this whole eating disorder. My parents had offered to send me to a counselor, but I said no. I felt like if I couldn't help myself, then how was I ever going to help people as a dietitian, which I now know was not a good reason to not go. It's always good to get help because it's very hard to get yourself out of this by yourself. So at some point I decided I'm really sick of this lifestyle. I don't want to live like this anymore. It's not healthy, and I'm really sick of this consuming my every thought, every minute of my day, and just wasting time on this. And that was probably after about 3 years of living this way. So I started reading some self-help books on eating disorders, and one of those was a memoir of somebody that had an eating disorder, and the book was called Wasted. And I, again, felt like, wow, I can so relate to this person, and I felt like I was not so alone anymore. So I started dating a new boyfriend, and this was a guy that I had met back in culinary school. We had reconnected, and after a while of us dating, he was kind of onto my problem and said, "You're not doing this anymore. This is not okay." And I finally felt like, yeah, okay, I don't want to do this either. And I really just need someone to kind of take my hand and help me get through this. And to some extent, he did that for me. So I remember being in my nutrition class, one of my nutrition classes, and the professor showed a cross-section of an elderly woman's leg. And they basically, if you were to take your thigh and cut it in half and kind of show the end that was cut off, it was an elderly woman that was sedentary versus a younger female athlete. And you could see the amount of muscle that was on the younger female athlete's leg and just a small ring of fat around her muscle versus the elderly woman's leg was barely any muscle and just a bunch of fat. And the point was to show what happens to your body when you are sedentary and you're not fueling your body. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want that to happen to me. In the same class, I believe it was, they showed graphs of your muscle mass rate in normal people versus somebody with uncontrolled diabetes versus someone that was starving versus somebody that had an eating disorder. And that was very eye-opening because you could see the chart showing your muscle mass rate going down with everybody that had uncontrolled diabetes, starving, versus an eating disorder. And I thought, wow, this is what I'm doing to my body right now. And all of these things were really kind of defining moments and really started to help me in the recovery process. So I started learning more about the roles of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins and how your body actually needs them and uses them in these nutrition classes. I started doing my own reading on nutrition and sports nutrition and how you need to actually eat to fuel your body, to grow your muscles, and to perform well in your sport. So things were finally starting to click for me at that point. And I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger until the next podcast. And I'm going to tell you how I still really kind of continued to struggle with things for a while, not nearly as bad as everything that I had explained, but really how I struggled with fueling my body for my sport and how I was able to turn it around and how God really kind of led me through all that, even though I had no idea at that point in time. So you're going to have to stay tuned for the next episode, which will be part 2 of my struggle with nutrition as a female athlete and how God flipped the switch. Hey friend, if this podcast inspired you, encouraged you, or changed you, I would love for you to leave me a review and share it with a girlfriend who will find it helpful or inspiring. That is the best way you can thank me and help me share my knowledge so I can help more people just like you. I'm so thankful that you spent this time with me today, and I'd love to connect with you. Join my Facebook group, Female Sports Nutrition, or send me a DM on Instagram, or hop on over to my website, EliteNutritionPerformance.com. I'll see you back here next week.